Larry Wayne Bell,
All right, Larry, and where were you born?
Prairie Grove, Arkansas.
And tell me, what was your date of birth?
9/8/40.
Okay. And who were your parents?
My parents were Vincent and Pauline Bell.
Okay. And tell me about your family at home. Were you the only child, or did you have other siblings?
I had a sister, have a sister, whose birthday is today. She hit the 70 mark. I kind of have to jabber about that. But that was our family.
And what was her name?
Juanne, Juanne.
Okay, and I just want to be sure you know that this is for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project, and that we'll be reproducing your interview, and to be sure we have your permission.
You have it.
Thank you, Larry. Tell me about your family's business.
Family's business, my father, Vincent, was in the drugstore. He started in the Sterling Drug when he was a sophomore in high school. You know, working behind the fountain and just doing whatever needed to be done. And he was there so long, and he started working in the pharmacy. You know, they let him oversee him, you know. And then you could get a practical druggist license. Didn't have to go to school. But you did have to take a test. And him and Clarence Davis went down and took the test, became practical druggist. You had to have a registered pharmacist on duty too, but you could get that license. And then I went to pharmacy school, became a registered pharmacist, and came back to work in that store.
When did your dad, tell me about when your dad first started working there. About what year was that?
Let me think about that. Well, he was a sophomore, so that made him about, 15 or so, and that would have been in about late 20s, early 20s.
Okay, and about what year would you have worked in the store?
I worked there when I was a junior, senior in high school. They had a work program. You could you work it out in the afternoon, and if you had someplace to go, and I checked in the merchandise and marked prices on it and that kind of stuff.
A lot of people have told us about this work program. Tell me more about it. How did that work, and how did that inspire you to do your career?
Well, I don't know how it worked. You know, I don't know but if you had a place to work, and they still do that, I think, you could get out a period or two early in the afternoon and go to that job. It's just practical training. And yeah, I think it helped. It helps people get an idea about what they want to do.
What other jobs did you do besides that when you were growing up?
My first job was at the IGA with Ronnie Stone and Guy Sparks, sacking groceries and carrying them out. And I wasn't very big. Sometimes I couldn't lift the boxes that they fill boxes full, you know, and 50-pound sack of flowers and stuff like that. But I made it do. I wasn't very. That was my first job. You know.
Any others?
No, he hauled hay, and you know that was the usual job around here in the summertime. But that's I probably just worked at the drugstore. And
what were some of your routines at home? What would you do to help out around the house? Well,
we had a big garden, and that was part of my big job was hoeing and helping plant and pick. And then when they got to where they didn't want to have so much garden, they just turned it into yard. And where the strawberry patch was sort of like this. Well, I had the push mower, no power equipment, just the push mower. My job to mow that strawberry patch. Oh my goodness. If you ever tried that, but just things like that. And we had some animals in our backyard, even though we lived in town. Had some hogs, and, you know. It was, but we had fun. We had fun. There was several kids about my age that lived within 2 blocks of where we lived, and every day was a ball game and just whatever, you know. But we had a good time.
Well, who were some of your friends, and what would y'all do for fun?
Tom McCoy, Slick McCoy, Bill Thurman, C.H. Miller, Wayne Hall, I can't remember now, Joe Geiger maybe, lived like I say, within 2 blocks of where I lived. And there was a big lot on the corner of the street. And that was our ball field. And so we had, you know, that was every day. And I remember when we weren't playing on that field, we'd play at home, have ping pong balls for our balls, and used broomsticks for the bats. And we played like we were whatever our favorite major league team was, and we knew them by heart, you know. And each batter you'd have to bat right-handed or left-handed, however that batter. But those ping pong balls, you could throw those, and they just went up there and went like that, you know. And if you hit one on the house or over the house, that was a home run. And we spent many hours doing that. Yeah.
Tell me about some of your earliest memories of Prairie Grove.
Well, I'm not sure whether I remember this stuff or I've just heard of it. We lived right downtown when I was born. We lived in a 2-story house right down on Main Street. And so I was, you know, that's where I started in Prairie Grove. I remember we had a big coal pile. The guy that the old man owned the house, they put in gas, and he would not have gas. He was scared to death of gas, that it'd burn the place down, you know. So we had coal. I remember that old dirty coal pile. I remember going to the movie, which was right across the street from where we lived. There was the houses that we lived in was where John Everett built his law office first. That was where it was. And went to the movie, which is just directly across the street. Take a quarter, get a dime to get in, and a dime for a Coke, and nickel for popcorn, and you know, for a quarter you could spend a Saturday afternoon doing that. And I remember when my dad came back from the service, I think I was probably 5 or 6, and my mother was letting me walk across the highway there over to the movies. And boy, he couldn't believe that. He couldn't believe that they were letting me go by myself across the street to the movies.
Tell me about going to school in Prairie Grove. What do you remember about that?
Well, we went to grade school which the building's gone now. It's just up the street from Methodist Church on the right. And that's where we went to elementary, and then we went to the 3-story building just north of that when we got to the 8th grade and 7th grade, I guess. We went there a year and a half, And then they built the high school up on the new property, and the gym was there, and Agri building, and then of course they tore the old 3-story. My mother always told me that 3-story building, she went to school there, and it was condemned when she went, and so it was it was still going when I went in 7th grade. 8th grade we moved over to the new building.
So what year did they build the new high school? About what year?
Let's see, 8th grade. 40, 53 or 4. Yeah.
Tell me some of the stores and businesses you remember going to as a young kid in Prairie Grove.
Well, of course, the Crescent was probably the main store in town, and the Florence Hills multi-faceted store. It was grocery store on one end and everything else in between, you know, on the other. And of course, there was several filling stations in town, as I remember, maybe 5 or 6. And the bank and hometown grocery. That pretty well filled it up.
What do you remember about Trades Day?
Trades Day, the town was absolutely full. You spent your money in town, and you got so many tickets for so many dollars, and put them in a big barrel rolling thing, and Saturday afternoon they'd meet up at the park and start drawing those tickets out, and they gave graduated amounts of money. You know, wasn't much, but boy, people came to town on Trades Day. Really, any Saturday. Sometimes it was hard to get up and down the streets walking. It was that packed. Of course, people didn't go out of town to trade then. They didn't have any way. It was 12, 15 miles to Fayetteville was a long trip. And a lot of people didn't even have cars. My dad walked to work. We didn't have a car. He walked to work. About, 3 or 4 blocks, 5.
Where did your family go to church?
I always went to the Prairie Grove Methodist Church.
Tell me what you remember about when you were a kid going to church.
Oh, we had a very active youth group, and had a lot of kids coming from other churches, and we had things going on at that time. Of course, the parents were involved. The parents, we didn't hire anybody to do that. The parents were involved.
Well, in addition to playing sports and stuff, sandlot sports, what else would kids do for fun back in those days?
Well, that's really about the main thing. I can't really remember. But I can remember our parents would send us out after breakfast or let us go out, and we wouldn't see them again until lunch. And you'd hear them holler, you know, and come in and eat and go back out, and you wouldn't see anything of them again until dinner time. But everybody did that, and everybody looked out, you know, for everybody else's kid. And somebody was doing something wrong, they correct them just as if they were their own. So you didn't really worry about anything happening to people.
What did your parents do for fun back when you were a kid? What was their social activity?
Well, they they would have people come, friends come in, you know, they would eat dinner, play cards. They played a lot of pitch and things like that, you know, but mostly it was things that was right there in town. They didn't go too far out of town. Once in a while we go to Fayetteville, maybe to a movie, but not too often.
What do you remember about the Battlefield Park? Do you remember that when you were a kid?
Battlefield Park, as I remember, there was one building, and it was the open building. I can't think what they call it. You know, it didn't have walls. It just had the cornerstones, and the park was just grown up. It was just weeds, just literally weeds. Till I guess Fred McChristian or somebody got a hold of it and started cleaning it up and adding these buildings and things. That's the way I remember it. I remember when we were, this is 1957, they was having the Labor Day thing. They didn't call it that, but at that time, but it was on Labor Day. And all of Falmouth was supposed to come and speak that day. Then the politicians, it was a political thing, you know, instead of clothesline fair, too much of that. But the Boy Scouts were in charge of parking, and you know, and it was just overwhelming on Sunday because Falmouth was supposed to be there. And we couldn't handle it. We couldn't handle it. A bunch of juniors in high school, sophomores. So the state police finally saw that wasn't going to work, and they took over, and we went swimming. But that was in '57. Where Falbus was, of course, he was in Little Rock. That's when the big deal that's mine. At Little Rock happened. Yeah.
Did he make it up here? That was a Little
He
Rock
was
9 incident?
He was tied up. You know, that's when the feds took over down Little Rock. Yep.
Tell me, do you remember when they started the the clothesline fair? Tell me about that, if you remember.
I don't remember when it was. I remember we used to cook chicken out on the open pits, and till I think the health department made us quit doing that. But the Lions Club was in charge of that, and they start fires at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they let them burn down then, and we had big racks that we used to cook half chickens. And so that was probably after I came back up here that I remember that. So that would have been middle '60s.
Tell me about when you were a kid, what the medical facilities were here in town, what doctors and hospitals and stuff there were that your father did business with, and later you.
Like I said, I was born in Prairie Grove, born at Elizabeth Hospital. The families had a pharmacy in that hospital. They served the patients that were there in the hospital, and the doctors, Dr. Frank Rigall, and later Dr. Manning, other doctors, I can't remember their names, Cecil Rigall, but there was always somebody coming from Canada. There were trainees, I guess, you know, like I don't know that they were interns, but they might have been a step above that. But they'd come down for a year or two or something, and we always had good medical facilities. Dr. Baggett, Dr. Mock, they were downtown in their office, and it was just a mecca for medical facilities. People came from four corners: Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and we mailed out prescriptions. at that time, the mail came through town 4 times a day, 2 times each way. So you could get things out. If they called at noon, you could get it out on 3 o'clock mail, you know. And we literally mailed huge amounts of prescriptions every day. And these people that were from, like I say, Kansas and over in Oklahoma, over in Huntsville, in that area, they all came. Yep.
How would you fill the prescriptions? Tell me how you would do that. Would they call or?
Yeah, those people just called it in, but they had to come in to the doctor maybe once every 3 or 4 months, most of them. You know, there's the continuing thing, but they had to come in every so often, and they'd get new prescriptions and bring them in. And of course, they'd mark refills on them, and so we could send them in the mail then. I'm not so sure you can send some of that stuff in the mail anymore. That, you know.
Tell me about some of the prescriptions that you would write. What would they be for? Same things we would do now or different?
Well, of course, everything was different. All the doctors in town, for one thing, used for cough, congestion, Finnegan with codeine. I mean, everybody, Dr. Baggett, Dr. Walton, Rick Alls, everybody, Dr. Manning. And I remember one time, we bought this stuff direct from Wyeth. And my dad, we usually got it about 20 gallons at a time. And he tried to get a better price for 100 gallons one time. And they wouldn't do that, so we just get 20 gallons. We used to buy, the main things was Amytal, and I don't guess that's even on the market anymore. It was a barbiturate. They used that kind of stuff instead of meprobamate, Equinil, and that stuff. They wouldn't hardly use that. They used this stuff that was really habit-forming. And we used to buy those in drums of 5,000, 10,000 at a time. And Eli Lilly, twice a year, would have a special promotion if you bought 100,000 assorted. And there was probably 6 or 8 different things we bought that way. Made it pretty cheap. It was a going business, no doubt about it.
Tell me about how long you worked at the store, and then when you decided to open your own store in Lincoln. How did that? The timeline on that. Tell me a little bit.
Let's see. I graduated in '63, and the hospital closed. When Medicare came in, they couldn't meet the standards of size. Like the hallways had to be so big, and the rooms had to be so big, and they couldn't do that. So they couldn't take Medicare patients, and so the hospital part of it closed. And Lincoln didn't have a pharmacy at that time. They'd had 2, but they retired and gone out of business, and so I don't think they'd had a pharmacy for 2 or 3 years over there. And since we didn't have the hospital part anymore, well, we had too many hands and too many pharmacists, and so we decided to go to Lincoln. We figured somebody was going to go to Lincoln sometime, so we went and opened up over there, and that was in '66. We opened over there in '66. And it closed last week.
Yeah, did you have some mixed feelings about that?
Oh yeah, you have mixed feelings, but you know, that's just progress, I guess. It wasn't for lack of business that they closed. It was, well, Harps was going to build a new store and they were going to put in a pharmacy, but the times have just changed so much with the insurance companies and the PBMs and the drug companies. They just about pushed the independent pharmacy out. The reimbursements are terrible.
Tell me more about your store here in Prairie Grove. After you left, what happened? You went to Lincoln. What happened to the
Well, the
store?
store here had several pharmacist owners. Clarence Davis, myself, my dad, and David Mast. And we had another, Blackie Wolverton worked there. He was a pharmacist. And Charlie Wolverton, who they bought the store from. That's who those owners bought the store from, was Charlie Wolverton. And so when we left, not when we opened the store in Lincoln, but 4 or 5 years later when my dad and I took over the Lincoln store, we bought out the two, our part of the two stores. We traded to them for all of the Lincoln store. Okay, so then a couple of years later, well, Gary Davis got out of school and he came back to Prairie Grove, and David Mast went to Missouri. He lived in Missouri, so went to work up there somewhere. The Wolvertons died, and so that's kind of the progression of it.
About what year would Gary Davis have taken over the store, roughly, if you remember?
Probably around early 70s, I think. I can't remember the dates for sure.
Well, and even after you moved us to the store in Lincoln, you were still real involved in Prairie Grove. What can you remember?
When we first opened the store in Lincoln, yeah, it was still under the same ownership at that time. And I worked once in a while in Prairie Grove, and once in a while one of those guys would come over to Lincoln and give me a day off. And we kind of swapped merchandise back and forth. We'd buy in quantity, and you know, I'd take part of it and they'd take part of it, stuff like that.
Well, tell me what you remember about the town and how it changed from the 70s up until now, because there's been a lot of
goodness.
change.
Well, now, where everything is what I call a junk store, there were thriving businesses in those stores. Now, if you get rid of the antique stores, we wouldn't have much. You get thinking about it. You'd have, downtown you'd have one drugstore and the Crescent and parts store and the bank. And that'd be about it. And but then every place was filled. There weren't any empty buildings as I remember. And but the times changed, and the highways got better, and the cars got better, and you could drive to Fayetteville easier, and so the dynamic just shifted. And if you didn't shift with it, well, you were in trouble.
When you first lived in Prairie Grove as a kid, did y'all have electricity the whole time?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah, since we lived right here in town.
What about in the rural areas back in those days?
I don't remember when the REA, Rural Electric, when that started, probably late 40s or something, I would guess. That made a huge difference in way of life in rural places. But we always had it. I do remember when they paved the main street through town. We lived in this two-story house right down on Main Street, and I was just a baby. I mean, I said I remembered it. I see pictures of it, and I was in some of those pictures when they paved the main street. And then I remember when they paved the street in front of my mother and dad's house. They moved there in, oh golly, 50s, middle 50s, moved the house in, and the street wasn't paved. Of course, the street where I live on now wasn't paved when I moved into it in 1964. It was a new subdivision and the streets weren't paved. But soon thereafter, you know, it was. But,
what other stories can you think of in Prairie Grove? Were you there the day the water tower fell down?
I was at church. I was at church, just up the street a block.
So did y'all hear about it and go down and look?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Tell me what you remember about that story.
Well, I don't really remember a whole lot, you know. It was quite a deal in town, though, I guarantee you that. Bill Ramsey, you know, he ruined all his shoes and boots and jeans and suits, I guess. They used to sell a lot of suits in that Crescent store. But people from all around came in there to buy suits. When Elton was there, Elton Skelton was there, and Bill took over from him. But yeah, I don't know whether Bill was happy about it or sad about it, because he had to, you know, he had a big insurance claim, and he got, you know, I guess rid of some of the old stuff that he couldn't sell, and I don't know, that's just speculation.
Any other stories you can think of?
Oh, God. Oh, man. I guess one of our biggest pastimes at nighttime, when I was a teenager, we didn't have a place to go and nothing to go in anyway, so we'd just meet down on Main Street. And in front of the mock clinic, there was a curb that you could sit on, and there'd be anywhere from 5 to a dozen of us boys would sit down there and spit and whittle, I guess, and you know, just that was our nighttime entertainment. And they'd leave the clinic building open, especially in the winter, so that you could go in and warm up. And the policeman, the night watchman, could go in and warm up. Now, can you imagine doing that today? Leaving a clinic building open all night? Also, the Colonial Courts was a big meeting place. And Ethel and Lloyd Jarish, they were from Wisconsin. I don't know how they ended up down here. But they stayed open till we got home from basketball games. Didn't make any difference where it was, how late it was. We could go up there, split an order of French fries and drink a Coke, and had a bumper pool game. We could do that. We could play cards. We could dance, whatever. And that was kind of the saving grace for the kids, you know, in those days. Everything went through the courts.